So this report will describe the various events that Environment Haliburton presented from January 2021 until present, and also some events that were newsworthy from an environment or climate change perspective during that period. Under ordinary circumstances, we would have held this AGM much earlier, but due to pandemic and other considerations, it was delayed until today. So since 2021 seems like old history, I'm going to review the events of 2022 first. So even though we've known about climate change for decades, our greenhouse gas emissions continue to grow, and it was underscored during the recent Conference of the Parties, or COP27, that Canada is among the very top emitters in the world, which for me is very disturbing. Over the past year, Environment Haliburton has continued to raise awareness among our community and of our leaders at all levels of our ecological crisis and our climate emergency. We have to remember to enjoy the beauty around us, however. These photos, although beautiful, are what our lake looked like after one of the many freeze-thaw cycles last winter, and that will likely happen again. Unusual and extreme weather has become the new normal. Picture of flooding in Washington last January. In January 2022, we had Corey McKay, the county's climate action coordinator, tell us about climate change planning in Hamilton County. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that we need rapid and ambitious action. Although we're glad that there is a plan in place to reduce our emissions, we at Environment Haliburton would like to see our county raise its climate ambitions. Also in January, Gordon Laxer spoke at one of our presentations. Dr. Laxer is a political economist and professor emeritus at the University of Alberta. He recently wrote a report exposing the disturbing power and influence of multinational foreign oil corporations on Canadian climate and energy policy. In his report, he talked about how all major oil corporations operating in Canada are fully or majority foreign owned. In a healthy democracy, said Laxer, the voters, not foreign influenced corporations, should shape the policies enacted in their name. In February, David Robertson of Seniors for Climate Action Now, or SCAN, gave a presentation detailing our provincial government's woefully inadequate climate plan. Again, let's pause and appreciate the natural beauty we have in Haliburton. As you know, the shoreline preservation bylaw soaked up a lot of time and energy over the past few years and was recently passed at the county level. It may not be perfect, but it's a good start. Having invested lots of money in cottage country, property owners want to believe that our lakes are as healthy as ever. However, due to the effects of acid rain, developmental pressure, and climate change, we are seeing changes in our lake ecosystems that are alarming. Lower oxygen levels, higher chloride concentrations from road salt, and invasive species are making it more likely for us to see blue-green algae and reduced numbers of fish in our lakes. Grace, the ancient snapping turtle who has lived in Haliburton, as Leora was saying, for over 100 years, galvanized concern about the filling in of wetlands across our county. As no one has confirmed a sighting of Grace, it is presumed that she was entombed, as Leora mentioned earlier. In March, we participated in a global climate strike to raise awareness of the unfolding climate crisis. In April, Dr. Samantha Green from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment talked about how climate change is already harming Canadians' health. The increases in extreme weather events result in increased emotional stress, homelessness, injuries, cases of heat stroke, cardiorespiratory issues, and Lyme disease from ticks that can now survive our more moderate winters. Environment Haliburton, along with other environmental and climate groups across Ontario, tried to educate people about Ford's scandalous lack of action on climate in the months leading up to our provincial election this past June. And as you know, Ontarians re-elected him despite the low number of people who actually voted for him. Also in the spring, we decided to try a different way of educating our community about our organization, about what a green transition might look like, and about some things that people or individuals can do to reduce their ecological footprint. We designed some bookmarks, had them printed, and distributed them around the county. One of these bookmarks ended up at the door of a property owner who almost became a board member. A second presentation in May featured two climate justice activists, Indigenous and settler, who have worked together on environmental issues and Indigenous sovereignty in the Ring of Fire region of Northern Ontario. Their names are Donna Ashamok, a member of the Cree Nation, who among other roles is a committee member of Indigenous Climate Action and co-chair of Mining Watch Canada. Dana Nadine Scott is the York University Research Chair in Environmental and Climate Change. For those of you who may not be aware, the Ring of Fire is located in the mineral-rich James Bay lowlands of Northern Ontario. Challenges facing the development of the Ring of Fire include infrastructure deficits such as roads, railway, electricity, and broadband and First Nations land rights. In September, we presented a talk by Terry Sprague, an Ontario naturalist from Prince Edward County. Terry talked about how we can make changes to our backyards and make them more attractive to birds and wildlife. In October, with the assistance of a previous and also soon-to-be board member, we developed environmentally themed questions for our municipal candidates and posted the responses on our web page. I don't want to keep you too long. The night is getting long, but for the purposes of our AGM, I do need to quickly review our presentations of the year 2021. In January, we had Muskoka's climate change coordinator, Kevin Boyle, talk about Muskoka's climate change strategy. This presentation was reviewed in the Toronto Star in 2021. In February, we had Dr. Elizabeth Favot, Assistant Lake Stewardship Coordinator, talk about blue-green algae, and we attracted over 300 participants. Over 400 watched the recording of our presentation. In March, Dr. Neil Hutchinson talked about the Lakeshore Capacity Assessment Project and what this teaches us about ecological standards and municipal shoreline planning. Then again in March, we collaborated with SCAN and learned about the Federal Climate Plan. This was in solidarity with Fridays for Future, now a global organization inspired by Greta Thunberg. In April, Brendan Martin, the coordinator of the ULinks Community Benthos Biomonitoring Program, talked about what the bugs that live along our shorelines can tell us about lake health. In May, our own Katie Peroshi, an environmental consultant, talked about how complex our lake ecosystems are and what we can do to improve our lake water quality. In August, we again collaborated with SCAN to present Mitchell Beer, who writes a newsletter called The Energy Mix. He talked about the prospects for a renewable energy-enabled exit from the climate emergency. In September, we had Dr. Jen Goby and two Indigenous people, Jadine Lavalley and James Orsakaj Ward, talk about the land back movement and how it is central to addressing the climate crisis. Dr. Goby is an activist scholar and researcher who teaches about climate justice and transformative change based on solidarity with Indigenous people. This presentation made some of us, including me, slightly uncomfortable, and this, I believe, was to move us along the path of truth and reconciliation. Also on September 8th, we held a climate protest along Highway 118 along Head Lake. Lots of people honked their support, but there's always a few who stomp on their accelerator to show off the clouds of black soot exploding out of their tailpipes. In October, we presented Mark Lee, senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, who talked about Canada's carbon emissions. This report looks at why net zero as a policy direction is a dangerous distraction from the emissions reductions we should be focusing on. Rather than gambling on carbon removal technologies, Canada should plan for a managed wind down of fossil fuel production and invest public resources in bona fide solutions like renewables and a just transition from fossil fuels. In November, we held another climate protest on the front steps of the County Administration Office in Minden to talk to our warden about our concerns about climate change, and we asked that the county declare a climate emergency and raise its climate ambitions. However, that is a decision that has to be voted on at the county level. The consensus at COP26 held a year ago in Glasgow, Scotland, was that while substantial progress was made on a number of areas, we are falling short of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This was a goal set at previous talks in Paris in 2015, and it remains off track despite various details to cut carbon emissions. The Glasgow Pact aimed to reduce the worst impacts of climate change. Current pledges, if met, will only limit global warming to about 2.4 degrees Celsius compared to the 1.5 degrees goal that was set at the Paris Accord. The agreement also pledged to significantly increase money to help poor countries cope with the effects of climate change and make the switch to clean energy. And of course, COP27 has just ended, and those pledges are now actual agreements. However, there was a heavy presence of fossil fuel executives at COP27. It's well recognized that in order to keep global temperatures at a livable level, most of the fossil fuels remaining in the ground must be left there. Last Sunday, the 2-week COP27 climate summit in Egypt ended with a global agreement to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but without a global commitment to phase out or even phase down the use of fossil fuels. The absence of such a commitment makes the COP27 deal nonsensical. Scientists have not found any path to achieve a 1.5 degree target without significantly reducing the world's dependence on fossil fuels. In conclusion, Environment Haliburton has had 2 busy years of virtual presentations. Giving our presentations virtually had the effect of increasing our numbers of participants significantly. We have been consulted as stakeholders about the Shoreline Preservation Bylaw, about short-term rentals, and our Vice President, Terry Moore, participated on the county's Community Climate Action Advisory Panel. We wrote letters to the editor. We had articles in the Highlander about various environmental and climate topics for a whole year, every month, and interviews on Moose FM. I also participated as a member of the Highlands East Environment Committee. Recently, we submitted letters to our MPP, Laurie Scott, our Minister of Ontario Environment, Conservation and Parks, David Piccini, and our municipal leaders regarding Bill 23. We will continue to strive to raise awareness in our community about environmental and climate-related issues through advocacy and education. As of today, 2 long-serving directors of Environment Haliburton are stepping down from our board. Eric Lilius and Carolyn Coburn have been involved in various positions on our committee since 2003, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude for their leadership and dedication. Eric has, since the beginning of the pandemic, been our Zoom coordinator and webmaster, among other roles. Carolyn has recently been our treasurer, and I thank both Eric and Carolyn for their help and their service. Carolyn and Eric won the Enviro Hero Award from the Haliburton Highlands Land Trust several years ago. Katie Peroshi, who has served as our secretary for 3 years, has moved to Bracebridge to pursue her career. Katie has been very helpful in helping us to understand the environmental impacts of some of the developmental issues that we have been following, and has kept excellent minutes of our meetings. So we are very sorry to see Eric, Carolyn, and Katie go, but we wish them all the best. In putting this report together, I was amazed at all the topics we covered and the people we reached. And that is thanks to the dedication of our whole board, and I would like to thank them all very much. And while that concludes my director's report, I have some very exciting news to share in the next part of our meeting, so please stick around for a few more minutes. Thank you all for your attention.